The idea that slowing population growth is good for the environment, I believe, is controversial mostly because people have no idea how you would do that without coercing someone to do something they don't actually want to do. I think that's the greatest source of controversy about it, because I think most people do intuitively know that more people is going to mean more uses of resources. The other source of controversy, and it's a very legitimate one, they're both legitimate. One of them, I think, is miscommunication. The other is much more logical, is that because there's such an imbalance in consumption among different populations, because the wealthy in the world tend to have slower population growth, some people think they have none at all, but they do have some, mostly, because they consume so many resources, and the poorer people in the world consume fewer resources, and their populations are growing faster. There's a sense, how can population matter? Because where population is growing, people aren't consuming. I think that's oversimplified, but that's a source of a lot of the controversy. Environmentalists tend to be practical. They tend to be very oriented toward what are particularly the technological changes we can make, the policy changes we can make. So when you introduce the idea that we need to slow population growth ultimately to improve the prospects for environmental sustainability, a number of environmentalists go, yeah, I can sort of understand where you're going with that, but it's just it's a little too difficult for me to deal with. The idea that there are 215 million women in the world who have an unmet need for contraception is based on estimates, for one thing, of women just in developing countries, not developed countries. So right away there's a whole population that's left out of that figure. And it's based on surveys that didn't interview 215 million people. They interviewed people doing demographic and health surveys around developing countries, interviewed a far smaller sample of women and then extrapolated beyond that. And the question they basically ask is, do you want to have a child right now? Do you want to become pregnant right now? And if for those who answered yes, are you using contraception? And then for those who answered no, they took that and figured, well, and then they extrapolated it and figured 215 million people need contraception and don't have it. I think there's a number of concerns about that issue. It's good if you understand that it does make sense in the family planning community to try to look at that number and see how can we meet as much of whatever unmet need is out there as possible. And it's not a bad assumption to assume that there are some barriers for most of those women that could be removed and they could get access to family planning, and that'd be a good thing. It's not clear that all of those women actually want to use family planning, however. To me, in terms of mobilizing environmentalists and mobilizing others to understand that there's tremendous potential for improving sustainability by improving women's status and power over their own lives. A much better way to frame the issue is, are women becoming pregnant because and when they want to become pregnant? Or are they being unpleasantly surprised by pregnancy? Or in a kind of a middle ground, do they want to become pregnant but only to satisfy other people or what they think the social expectations of them are, even though personally they'd rather not be pregnant? That's a gray area that is a little difficult to deal with. So I have been arguing that we ought to be focusing, at least when we talk about these issues publicly and with environmentalists, more on the question of unwanted pregnancy, and not even taking the negative view that we should eliminate all unwanted pregnancy, so much as framing it positively that women should be in control, personal control of the timing of pregnancy for themselves. Essentially, you build women's capacity to run their own lives and do what they want with their own lives, to have children when they want to and not when they don't want to, that just that alone is going to actually end population growth and actually send it into reverse. I think that's a positive message that most environmentalists and most of the public might be willing to embrace.